War begins with orders, but it ends with conscience. In 1943, amid the dying roar of the Eastern Front, a German officer named Captain Erich Hartmann found himself standing on the edge of duty and morality. He was a soldier of the Wehrmacht, loyal, decorated, and bound by oath. Yet, as the snows of Russia buried cities and souls alike, Erich began to see not victory, but the slow decay of humanity itself. The eastern winds howled through the wreckage of Smolensk. Children without shoes scavenged for bread. Prisoners of war shivered behind barbed wire fences. Erich had joined the army believing he was protecting his homeland, but now he wondered what homeland was worth this. Every order came stamped with the seal of the Reich, but to obey was to silence the very thing that made him human. He began to write in a secret journal, a crime punishable by death. In its pages, he recorded not victories, but sins, the burning of villages, the deportations, the silent eyes of those led away. He called it the Chronicle of Shame. He found small ways to resist. A warning whispered to a captured Russian boy before an execution squad arrived. Falsified reports that saved civilians from deportation. Medicine lost from army supplies. He fought, not with bullets, but with mercy. Yet every act of compassion brought danger closer. His own men whispered that the captain had grown soft. One sergeant, a brutal loyalist named Vogel, began to watch him. In February 1944, orders arrived to clear a nearby village accused of harboring partisans. Erich read the command 3 times, his breath slowing. It meant burning homes and killing everyone inside. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at his reflection in a cracked mirror, a man wearing the uniform of evil, yet clinging to the faint ember of good. "If I do nothing," he whispered, "I am no different from them." At dawn, he gathered a handful of men he trusted, quiet soldiers, weary of blood. He told them the truth. There are no enemies in that village. Only mothers, fathers, and children. He tore the written order into pieces. They moved out before sunrise, not to destroy, but to warn. Erich's men reached the village just as the execution squad approached from the other side. Smoke rose. Chaos erupted. Erich shouted for the villagers to flee through the woods. Gunfire cracked through the dawn. Vogel, the sergeant, spotted Erich and screamed, "Traitor!" Bullets tore through the trees. Erich returned fire, only to buy time. He saw a mother carrying her child across the frozen field and threw himself between them and the bullets. By nightfall, the village burned, but hundreds had escaped. Erich's name was marked in military records as missing, presumed dead, but he wasn't dead. He fled into the forest with only his journal and the guilt of his own insignia. Behind him, his country raged on, but in front of him began something greater than war, the fight for redemption. In war, courage is often mistaken for violence, but true courage is refusing to obey the evil that commands you. For Captain Erich Hartmann, the battle had only just begun, not for Germany, not for victory, but for his soul. The forest became his refuge and his prison. After the massacre at the village, Captain Erich Hartmann disappeared from the Wehrmacht's records. To his commanders, he was a traitor. To the few survivors, he was a ghost who had saved them. In the cold silence of eastern Poland, Erich began a new war. A war without banners, fought in shadows and whispers. Winter dragged on like an endless punishment. Erich lived on stolen rations, melted snow, and the memory of gunfire. Each night he opened his journal, the Chronicle of Shame, and wrote the truth of the Reich's crimes. But writing was no longer enough. He needed to act. Near the borderlands, he encountered a band of Polish partisans, men and women branded as terrorists by the Nazis, yet fighting only to survive. When they captured him, rifles raised, Erich didn't beg for mercy. He simply said, "I know how they think. Let me help you fight them." Suspicion turned to disbelief. A German officer offering to help the enemy? But as days passed, Erich proved himself, with maps, stolen codes, and supplies taken from abandoned depots. The resistance gave him a new name, the Ghost Captain. He moved between forests, sabotaging Nazi convoys, cutting telegraph lines, freeing prisoners from transports. Every act of defiance echoed his belief, "If I can't stop the war, I can stop the next atrocity." Yet, each success brought him closer to exposure. His journal became a record not just of guilt, but of hope. Within its pages, he listed every life he saved, and everyone he failed to. One night, Erich and the partisans ambushed a German supply train carrying ammunition and food bound for the front. The plan was simple: derail the train, rescue prisoners, vanish into the night. But halfway through the operation, a familiar voice echoed through the fog. It was Sergeant Vogel, the same man who once called him traitor. Vogel Vogel had been reassigned to this sector, and now he was the one guarding the convoy. Fate, it seemed, wasn't finished with Erich yet. Gunfire erupted. The night lit up in flashes of orange. Erich faced the man who had hunted him, a soldier still loyal to the Reich, to blind obedience. Their eyes met through the chaos, one driven by rage, the other by remorse. Vogel shouted, "You betrayed Germany!" Erich answered softly, even as bullets whizzed past. "No, I betrayed monsters." The train exploded, a column of flame against the black sky. Erich was thrown to the ground, bleeding but alive. Vogel vanished in the smoke. The partisans dragged Erich to safety, and by dawn, the surviving prisoners were free. But the cost was immense. The resistance was now hunted by German intelligence. Posters of the ghost captain appeared across nearby villages, offering 10,000 marks for information leading to his capture. Exhausted and hunted, Erich found solace in small acts, helping the wounded, sharing food, and reading letters confiscated from German mail. Messages from soldiers to mothers and wives. It reminded him that behind every uniform, even the enemy's, there was a beating heart. In his journal, he wrote, "War blinds men, but even blind men dream of home." As spring thawed the snow, Erich realized his rebellion was no longer about surviving. It was about redeeming what humanity still existed in a dying world. In the silence of resistance, one man's conscience became his weapon. The Reich called him a ghost. The resistance called him brother. But Erich Hartmann knew the truth. He was both. A soldier without an army, yet fighting for something no flag could claim, the soul of mankind. They say the dead are the lucky ones in war, because the living must carry the memories. By summer of 1944, Captain Erich Hartmann had become a phantom of the Eastern Front, his name whispered in the forests, cursed in German camps, honored in partisan songs. But Erich carried no pride, only fear that his defiance had become a myth too large for him to live up to. The partisans now numbered hundreds. The Soviets were pushing westward. The Reich was falling apart. Yet its claws still reached deep. German intelligence had dispatched special units to eliminate deserters and traitors. They called them the Cleaners, ruthless, silent men who hunted their own. One of them was led by none other than Sergeant Vogel. Vogel had survived the train explosion months earlier. He bore the scars across his face, reminders of his hatred. To him, Erich wasn't just a traitor. He was a personal vendetta, a stain on German honor. By September, Vogel's men cornered Erich's group near the border of Belarus. For days, they played a deadly game. Traps, false signals, decoys. The forest echoed with ghosts. Erich began to feel the walls close in. He knew if the WW2 captured, his comrades would face torture and death. He told them, "If they find me, don't fight for me. Fight for what we stand for." That night, a message came through a captured German radio frequency, a code only Erich would understand. It read, "The fatherland remembers its traitors." Vogel was taunting him, calling him out directly. Erich decided to end it. He planned to lure Vogel away, giving the partisans time to escape deeper into Soviet lines. On the third night, under a heavy rainstorm, he left camp alone. The journal, the chronicle of shame, he left behind with a young partisan woman named Anya, saying only, "If I don't return, make sure the world reads this." Then he vanished into the storm. Near the riverbank, beneath the shattered bridge, he met Vogel, face to face once again. There were no soldiers, no orders, only two men standing in the ruins of their own beliefs. Vogel raised his pistol. "You think saving a few peasants makes you a hero?" Erich answered quietly. "No, it makes me human." Erich fell to the mud, gripping his side. But as Vogel approached to finish it, Erich pulled a small detonator from his coat, connected to explosives hidden beneath the bridge. His last words were barely a whisper. "No more bridges for monsters to cross." The explosion tore through the valley, a flash of fire and rain. Both men vanished in the roar. At dawn, the partisans found the ruins. Of Erich, there was no trace, only his cap, floating in the muddy river, and a piece of charred paper from his journal. Anya pressed it to her chest. The words were barely legible, but one line remained clear. To fight your own army is to fight your own reflection, but to stop evil, even for a moment, is to save eternity. The enemy within is not the one who wears another uniform. It's the one who follows orders when his heart begs him not to. Captain Erich Hartmann fought his own army, but in doing so, he may have saved his own soul. After the thunder fades, comes silence, and in that silence, history decides who will be remembered and who will be erased. The bridge where Captain Erich Hartmann vanished was swallowed by fog and rumor. To the Reich, he was dead. To the resistance, he was a martyr. But to the world, he was no one at all. Weeks passed. The partisans buried their fallen and moved west with the advancing Soviet line. Among them was Anya, the young woman who carried Eric's journal, the Chronicle of Shame. Its pages were stained with mud, blood, and rain, but its words burned brighter than fire. In those fragile pages lived everything Eric had risked his life for: truth. As the Soviets entered Poland, Anya faced a choice: destroy the journal to protect the resistance, or deliver it to someone who could tell the world. She chose the second. Dressed as a nurse, she crossed battlefields and smuggled trains, clutching the worn book beneath her coat. Each checkpoint was a death sentence waiting to be written, but she moved with faith that one man's story could outlive his silence. Months later, the war began to crumble. Hitler's Reich was collapsing under its own weight. Cities burned, armies surrendered, flags changed. But truth never surrendered easily. In Berlin, libraries of propaganda were torched, evidence was buried, records destroyed. Yet somehow, a single journal found its way to a desk in London, delivered by hands trembling with exhaustion. The British intelligence officer who opened it expected the usual Nazi reports: coordinates, troop movements, code phrases. But instead, he read something he couldn't forget. "We have become what we swore to fight. We kill not for victory, but for obedience. Forgive us." It was signed Captain Erich Hartmann, Wehrmacht, 1944. The British officer wept. The journal spread quietly among intelligence circles, and later, war crimes investigators. It exposed operations, names, and atrocities that would otherwise have vanished in the rubble of history. But the author's name was erased. For safety, for politics, for convenience. Erich Hartmann became a ghost once more, not hunted this time, but forgotten. His grave was nowhere, his medals never claimed, yet the lives he saved lived on. Decades later, one of those lives, a boy he rescued from the Smolensk village, grew up to teach history in a free Poland, and every year he told his students, there was once a German who refused to be a Nazi. Time moved forward as it always does. The noise of war faded, replaced by the quiet hum of modern life. But in the silence between generations, some stories whisper back. In 1963, a British journalist discovered the Chronicle of Shame in a forgotten archive. He published excerpts anonymously under the title "The Soldier Who Fought His Own Army." The world was stunned. People asked, who was he? No one could answer. But that didn't matter, because his words had already done what his uniform never could. They made people remember. And in that silence, between history and memory, Captain Erich Hartmann finally found peace. Not in a medal, not in a parade, but in the quiet, knowing that his choice mattered. Because sometimes, the bravest act in war is refusing to fight. The war ended, but conscience never does. The world forgot his name, but every act of mercy, every refusal to obey, every life spared, carries his legacy still. He fought his own army, and in doing so, he fought for all of us. The war was over, but in the heart of Germany, silence echoed louder than victory. Among the burned remains of a farmhouse near the Elbe River, Allied soldiers uncovered a single notebook. Its cover was charred, but inside were words written by a man history had forgotten: Captain Wilhelm Adler. His final entry read, "If my death awakens even one conscience, then I have not died in vain." Years later, an American historian named Lieutenant James Carter stumbled upon Adler's name in captured war archives, classified reports, redacted letters, whispers of a German officer warning civilians before SS raids. Carter realized this wasn't a traitor. It was a man who had chosen truth over tyranny. In 1972, Anna Adler visited the Dresden archives. She had grown up believing her father was a coward, but that day she found his last letter, addressed to my daughter. In it, he wrote, "Truth is not decided by victors, but by those who dare to remember." Today, that letter rests inside a Berlin museum. Visitors walk past it, unaware of the man who defied orders, who chose conscience over command. History forgot his name, but not his truth. Outside the museum, the city hums, rebuilt, alive. But somewhere in the wind that sweeps over the Elbe, echoes remain. The voice of a soldier whispering through time. Even in darkness, someone dared to see the light. The war ended long ago, but the fight for conscience, for the courage to stand alone, never ends. This was the story of the soldier who fought his own army and won through truth.